Trumptopia. A special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast, hosted by yours truly, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. On today's show, Trump show turbulence. I said the show twice. I said the word show twice in that sentence and ruined it. On today's special report, Trump show turbulence. What's going on, folks? As abruptly as they began, right around Easter, after how long of denying us any kind of White House briefing performance by anybody. Remember that part? Remember when we just weren't going to have White House news briefings anymore? After all that, he's done this marathon daily briefing since Easter. And now, after the whole debacle about injecting disinfectants and trying to penetrate the body with UV light, he just seems to be toning it down and or backing away. All right, let's try to unpack some of that, because I know I've already expressed a lot of opinions, but I've been thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And first of all, something that hadn't occurred to me yet, but is like kind of right there in front of our faces and ironic and funny. I don't know if ultraviolet light blood irradiation therapy is one of those real things that's been around forever and we're just all idiots and we don't know about it because they haven't bothered, because it's not popular, because the industries do what they do, and sometimes products have been there for 50 years and we just don't know about them, right? It's either that or, and I don't know which is the case, but is this content, because I've never come across any of that, never heard anybody reference it before, no one had provided links to this in my circle of social media circles until this moment, right? Like there was no apparent, and I cannot claim to have my fingers in all the pies everywhere, but there was no apparent advocacy going on for ultraviolet light blood irradiation therapy. And one would imagine, again, this is speculative, folks. I haven't quote done the research, because frankly, who has, right? If you Google something, you're not researching it. You're asking the internet, or rather specifically Google. And I know a lot of people are now transferring to a thing called DuckDuckGoose. But how do you know that isn't owned by Google or some other company even more bizarre or whatever, more potentially evil and corrupt? I'm not accusing Google of being evil and corrupt. But what I'm saying is the word research gets flung around a bit. 420 minutes in. Okay. But yeah, okay, so this thing with the UBI therapy, ultraviolet light blood irradiation therapy. Never heard of it. When I Googled UBI, I got universal basic income. Didn't get anything about UBI as ultraviolet blood irradiation therapy. But then when I typed it all out, I did get a couple of articles, and I kind of just poked around and looked at one or two, and I was like, okay, there seems to be a body of literature out there claiming that this is a thing. Now, did this all go up in the last 15 days, 10 days? because it's part of some echo chamber disinformation confuse and distract agenda thing, because that happens, right? Is this disinformation, bad information, fake content being distributed in anticipation of or in response to Trump's random commentary? Or is there real significant potential there? I don't know. I'm going to try and do a little bit of looking into it. But I make no promises, right? Because I am a talk show opinion. I'm a opinion talk show host. I'm an opinion-based talk show host. I'm not a reporter. I'm not a journalist. I'm not pretending to be. I'm not a researcher. The only thing I can claim to have researched is global spiritual tradition. That I can sort of say from at an amateur level, it's just me and it's a hobby. I can say I've done some real reading, right? I don't even want to call it research. I'm going to call it reading, like educational reading, studying. I've studied a little bit. Why do I bring that up? This situation right here, and we should probably check in with some of the numbers. This situation right here is unprecedented, but not in the ways that we might at first assume, right? We have, oh God, there's so many layers, so many angles, so many vectors we can get into here. Let's just stick with this thing of the irradiation therapy. Gonna look into it, right? And arguably, Trump's comments were not quite as bad as the media hype makes it out to be, but also not quite as seemingly genius and brilliant as the Trump base would like you to imagine that they are. For example, so I found stuff on blood irradiation therapy, but quite frankly, as someone who's generally curious and into the world and and just wants to know what's going on with technology and stuff, I have personally never heard of that before. Doesn't mean it didn't exist. Okay? Let's take a moment and remember, folks, just because we've never heard of something, no matter how smart we believe ourselves to be, no matter how well informed we believe ourselves to be, just because we've never heard of something, you, me, I, anybody in particular, doesn't mean it never existed, right? Plenty of people have never heard of me, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. And yet here you are listening to my podcast, and future new listeners will arrive. And up until then, they will have never heard of me, right? Okay. So, gonna have to do some checking, but the one place that's like in the middle, the blood irradiation therapy, I haven't had a chance to check into, but the other two wacky suggestions that dear old Donald Trump has made in recent COVID-19 briefings, I've had the opportunity to do a little bit of poking around into, looking into, right? The first one, I can't pronounce it, and comically, he's had some hard times pronouncing it, but hydrochlorochlorine, that's just one of those words. Why did you put so many syllables in? Why didn't we just stick it to hydrochloro? Easy to say. Hydrochlorochlorine, that potentially miracle solution, which if I am remembering correctly, because I don't have any scripty bits in front of me here, has been effectively used to defend and or fight against malaria. Now, I don't know about you, but I know enough about basic medicine, despite anyone's argument that may all be brainwashing and lies. I know enough about what we consider fundamental, biology and medicine to understand that, to the best of my understanding, malaria and COVID-19 are radically different kinds of pathogens, and they generate different kinds of disease. Disease, by the way, for those who are sticklers for accuracy and language, is the resulting phenomenology. The germ or virus or bug or whatever, that's not the disease itself, right? Like, it isn't a disease. It is a living organism trying to do its fucking business. Right? Just like we are. But the resulting phenomena, the impact that that living organism has on its environment and its host surroundings, that's the disease. So I've always giggled when people go to the noble but sort of silly sounding level of like, humanity is a disease upon the earth. The impacts that we cause, that's a disease, right? Like the fact that we cause so much pollution and chop down the forests and pave over everything, that generates and causes disease. It does. And we're going to talk about a couple things that cross my mind here, but I digress. Specificity and accuracy in language is clearly something that's important. That's what I was trying to get at with that whole disambiguation between the pathogen and the disease. Trump, setting aside whatever criticisms may be valid about his style and approach, Trump does something really well. He conflates the shit out of everything so that, like, there is no opportunity to disambiguate and understand. And arguably, this might be his, like, true brilliance as a scam artist, as a profiteer, as a politician. Don't even get me started with that argument that he's not a politician. Fuck that noise. I think I've said it before on the show, but if you run for office and if you quack like a duck and walk like a duck and, swim like a duck and poop like a duck and have a screwy penis, in case you don't know, ducks' penises are literally corkscrew shaped, then you're a fucking duck. I don't care what you call yourself, right? If it quacks like a duck and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, Trump may very well insist that he's not a politician, although he also, quite curiously, will say, I'm a politician now, right? He plays both ends. He plays two vectors. He picks two oppositional stances and pretends to occupy both places at the same time. That's his stroke of genius. Being able to insert little nuggets of truth or truthiness, truth-like content into highly divisive, exaggerated, and otherwise totally false content sometimes, in order to basically pit the two groups that he's cajoling against each other. The hydrochlorochloroquine that he hyped so much was, not approved, not really originally intended for this kind of pathogen, and there was zero real evidence, right? There was the correct and appropriate, medical industry interest in investigating it, because you shouldn't overlook potential tools in your arsenal that might work against a new enemy, right? Absolutely valid. But to promote it and to literally pull up onto the stage an example volunteer of someone who, quote unquote, was cured by it without there being any evidence that she actually was. She might have just taken the drug and survived the infection, right? Like, that can happen. You can take a drug that has absolutely nothing to do with the infection that's ailing you, and then magically, coincidentally, at the same time, have the drug in your body and have it really doing absolutely nothing to the particular pathogen, and have your body cope with the pathogen. That's not impossible. That's not outside of the realm of reality of how the world works and how the body works. I digress. So he hyped and promoted, and spoke irresponsibly about a drug that turns out, now that we're getting some deeper results, some further, no, it's like some actual investigative, assessments are being done by people in the industry, right? That pharmacology, I think that's the right kind of label to throw at it. The results they were at first ambiguous, and now they're leaning towards, this drug might have bad interactions with the pathogen and its the symptomology that it causes. Because the most recent reporting and, from what I understand, scientifically documented and verified assessment was done on with some testing done on veterans recently, where more veterans on the pool of test subjects that received the chlorodyne or whatever it's called, more of them died than the control group, which received a placebo, right? That's never a good sign. Now, we can't necessarily attribute these deaths directly, exclusively to the drug, right? But it's probably a confluence of bad interactions. I digress. So he immediately stopped talking about it, hasn't mentioned it since. And even Fox News, which has been, bending over backwards to applaud the president for his brilliant, genius out-of-the-box thinking, has had to sort of rein in that endorsement and kind of let it slide off the plate and not bring it up so much anymore. And even, to the best of my understanding, has had some of their talking heads acknowledge that, verification and testing is really important, and maybe, waiting until that's really, a drug has been approved is the best thing, without ever really completely acknowledging that they were, dead wrong to be advocating the use of ineffective pharmaceutical drug just because, it makes them look like they're just trying to profiteer on that drug during a time of true emergency. If you accept that it's truly an emergency. I have a really nuanced opinion about this whole thing, and I hope I'm not spiraling out of control when I talk about it so much that it isn't eminently understandable. But let's come back to this issue of just bad endorsements and how it's backfiring on Trump. So my jury's out on the blood irradiation therapy. What I was going to say earlier, which I think I got distracted from, which is that there's some really interesting, goofy irony there. And that's that, over on the highly marginalized, ridiculed community that is often, virtually pissed in the face on by the Trump base, are those that believe in spiritual healing, in esoteric magic, and in, light and frequency being critical tools at an organic level. So there's an interesting nexus there. Now, obviously, Trump wasn't talking about, energy healing and light workers and crystals and shit. He was talking about some sort of technological device that one way or another could project light in such a fashion that it penetrates the body deeply enough and selectively only damages the disease, the pathogen. Sorry, I just committed my own error, right? That I just called out. And that's plausible, not impossible, but like I said, not yet verified. And what's interesting is, now, I don't know what this means yet. I haven't decided what this means yet, but in the mainstream media, because yes, I'm well aware of all the problems with media, with big, big TV and big news. If we're going to borrow the term big from Big Pharma or Big Brother, I'm well aware. But, and so it's interesting and curious that none of the medical professionals that have been asked about this in the 24 hours or slightly more than 24 hours going on 36, is it, the next one? Almost 48. of these comments that no one said, well, there has been this experimental procedure over here that does this and that hasn't been proven yet, which would have been pretty cool. Most of them have just shaken their heads and said, I don't know what he's talking about, and it's irresponsible of him to spitball and muse and just sort of wax proto-philosophically about possible therapeutic modalities, albeit he did include the disclaimer that he's not a doctor multiple times, and that makes it funny. Meanwhile, let me come full circle, right? Like the early drug that he proposed turned out to be potentially deadly. This irradiation thing, which might have an interesting crossover for spiritualists, is seemingly unheard of, except for the fact that there are some random articles about it when you type in a very specific set of keywords. And then the final one, this injecting of... He literally said, he asked Dr. Bricks, couldn't there be a process by which we just introduce disinfectant into the body? That's me putting it in my own words. And oh God, the look on her face, that poor woman, the faces she made in that footage, I feel so pained and horrible for her. I feel so bad for her. I feel empathy and compassion for her. She is in such a catch-22 of trying to get out professional medical messaging to the American public, which she must feel some level of passion or calling to, or some belief that it's important, because she clearly does not agree with President Trump and is putting up with him and is making her best efforts to sort of, without getting confrontational, work the valid information back into the flow of discussion during each of these briefings. But this final modality, this abstract idea, the weirdest part of which was like he was talking about getting it into the lungs and just cleaning the lungs. I had a thought right then when I was watching it live. There is an extreme, radical, physical surgical procedure for cleaning the lungs, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I do vaguely recall, and had in that moment live, while I was watching it live on TV, like they do that for some sort of weird fungal problem. Like there's a lung fungus that there's a fungus that if it gets into your lungs, it grows like crazy. And I just remembered, I'm going to be scared. I thought in that moment that he was going to go to that level of a suggestion, let's start chopping people open and just scrubbing their lungs with sponges, which I don't know that would be helpful against COVID-19. But apparently it is the one radical way to try and save someone's life if they're deeply infested with this lung fungus. I don't remember what it's called. I don't remember where I read that. And forgive me if that turns out to be science fiction that I randomly cross-referenced in my head and I'm wrong. I'm not pretending or claiming to be authoritatively 100% sure about that. I just felt a moment of fear of is he going to go to that level of suggesting that extreme of a therapeutic modality? But returning to the actual thing he recommended, of somehow introducing, and he literally did say, couldn't we inject disinfectant into the body? First things first. There's a great debate going on about his phrasing and about whether or not he was recommending that to the American people, whether or not he was being sarcastic, whether or not he was genuinely asking the doctors exactly word for word, verbatim, what he was saying, whether or not he was doing it in such a way as to mock the media, or whether or not he was literally hoping that people might go and try it for themselves. It's akin to the, hey, Russia, if you're listening, or was it China? It was Russia or China. If you're listening, I think it was Russia. If you're listening, can you dig up the Hillary Clinton emails, right? He says it, and he says it in such a way that he must know it's going to aggravate the shit out of anybody who does not like him. And he also, the way he phrases these suggestions, he phrases them in such a way that anyone who agrees and wants to take him literally can feel great about doing it. And that he will cajole and wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and say just enough to keep them believing that he's not being sarcastic. That's just as a way to throw the opposition off his tail. That he really does mean these things. And the evidence therein of this actually being a sort of technique or approach of his is when he's, openly, publicly, on television, at his rallies, encouraged his fan base to get physical with people they don't like to get physically violent. And then we suddenly he would encourage this, and we suddenly encountered noticeable increases in political violence. In people wearing MAGA hats kicking the shit out of somebody, or people who leftists getting. But here's the thing, right? He knows that he's inciting both sides, and that's important. Now, conversely, back to this thing about the disinfectant. What was fascinating about this whole little episode with these 3 weird, crazy suggestions is that part of his base, the savvy sort of they know that they think that they're doing the president's work or maybe, helping him by trying to, you could, in the Catholic religious sense, you could follow that tradition and label them apologists. Now, that term is no longer super commonly known, so that might not make any sense. So go look it up. But there's people who are very wicked smart and very savvy and are out there functioning as volunteer Trump apologists. And they were hot for this one really quick because they found the links to the few early encouraging results to the early trials of hydrochloroquine, or chloroquine, or whatever the fuck you pronounce it. And they found the articles about, ultraviolet light blood irradiation, wherever those mysteriously came from out of nowhere. They might have been sitting on the internet for 100 years, who knows? But, and they also found, a way, they're just brilliant at making mental gymnastics look like they're not mental gymnastics, and it's your cognitive dissonance you're coping with, right? And so they found articles about a substance called MMS, which is supposed to be some sort of mineral solution that's disinfectant and is good for you, and you're supposed to put it in your body. I don't remember. And people have been selling it since before the COVID-19 pandemic, I believe. I could be incorrect about that, but I think so. And the most interesting bit about that, it's being referenced as of course you can inject disinfectant. Look at this. And there's a bunch of other things too, formaldehyde in vaccines are disinfectants. So what the fuck are you all freaking out about? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But 2 things. One, curiously, this particular product, MMS or whatever it is, I have found statements, and I've not been able to verify them, so I don't know for a fact, but curiously, there are statements floating around, reporting the fact that, and I've seen this on the news as well, that apparently Trump's own DOJ, right? And I don't know if Bill Barr and Trump are just unaware of this or what, but Trump's own Department of Justice are currently in the act of prosecuting people who peddle this crystal disinfectant solution product. Because it is crystalline based. It's a powdery thing. And because apparently people have gotten sick, and it's apparently just some form of dehydrated, diluted bleach, or something very, very close to chemically similar to bleach. Who knows? I'm not sure. Obviously, I don't have enough time in the day. I don't have staff. I don't have an army of foot soldiers to go and bring me the content so I can distill it down to the show. I gotta do all this on my own. So, it's just interesting tidbit, right? He's promoting these things, and then There's either public backlash because they sound incredulous, or actual facts come out that are like, yeah, not a good idea. And yet the base is out there, like, convolutedly bending themselves into pretzels to try to make it okay, try to make it all make sense, to try to get, us who oppose him, regardless of whether we oppose him because we're Democrats, which I am not, or we oppose him because of other reasons, which I have too many reasons to list right now. But they're really trying to, there are people out there, I think, authentically, earnestly, for whatever reasons, they've drunk enough Kool-Aid, trying to swing minds, swing voters back over to the Trump side by intellectually rationalizing his cornucopia of cuckoo. Here's the thing, though. Wouldn't be surprised if Trump is now sort of like savvy to that and counting on it, and hasn't been for a long time, because of the way he creates these divisive statements. Anybody out there that thinks he's stupid, please forgive me, dear friend. We're on the same team. We oppose him, but y'all wrong about him being stupid. The man is savvy. He may be incompetent in certain areas of expertise, but even I am incompetent at welding, and I've got an IQ up there to put me in the genius category. I could learn welding really quickly, but if you suddenly threw me into an emergency situation and insisted that I did welding without any training, I would be borderline incompetent, right? So let's be clear about the way we're using words. Trump, I really don't think is stupid. And this last few days is an example of, like, I think he's been out there trying to achieve something that is not obvious to either his base or his opposition. And that's why it works. Now, curiously, and I don't know why, although there's already reporting going on about it in the media, he cut down his appearance time to 20 minutes. Arguably one of the shortest, if not the absolute shortest, press conference that he's ever held. I can think of a few others that were really, really short because he was, in fact, pissed off at something going on in the coverage, in the media coverage, and he would just wanted to, like, say a thing and be snarky and walk away. But out of the last however many fucking tedious number of days that he's been doing this on the daily, that was arguably the most abrupt and bizarre. And I blinked and it was gone. It was over. And I was like, what did I miss? What the fuck happened? I had to, like, rewind it and watch because I got sidetracked, futzing around with stuff and, like, answering things on social media and whatnot. So today, Saturday, April 25th, as of the beginning of this recording and this broadcast, this is live. I'm recording this live on Sprecher. As of that time, Pacific time, it's now 2:07. I don't know that there's been a new White House task force briefing. And according to the speculative sort of, from sources inside the White House that don't want, that want to remain anonymous, always questionable whenever any side of the news media does it, the news media spectrum. Everyone accuses everybody else of being fake news, but they're all doing the same bullshit, you guys. That's obvious to me. It has been since I was a kid. I'm not. They also still have to sort of share some of the truth, right? If they don't want to be immediately... that's a whole... I've already done a big ramble about what I think about the news media and the conspiracy theories around them. Dig that one up. The short of it is, since I've already rambled on for too long, the short of it is, as I've been trying to find a way to express it in real time here, I'm fairly certain that he's clever enough, that he's not so stupid as to not realize that what he's doing when he does it. He's saying things that will trigger his opposition and give his base something to sink their teeth into or defend him over or, attack his opposition about. And he knows he's getting both of those vectors done. As a friend of mine, I've already quoted this, quote it again, because it just keeps ringing truer and truer and hitting home harder and harder. He has an incredible gift at spoon-feeding two opposing forces exactly what he wants to spoon-feed them and what they want to hear. Right? And I'm paraphrasing it and rephrasing it in my own words, I don't have it in front of me. But the genius of it is, as my friend points out at the end of his quote, is that you're left wondering, to whom is he actually lying to? And it's almost impossible to tell. Not without zooming way the fuck back out, abdicating political biases and political attachments to your party, and just looking at the factual pattern of the way he makes false statements and the way he contradicts himself, whether, he's contradicting a false statement or a true statement, he contradicts himself constantly and acts as if he is not. He does it with that, nonchalance, this all makes sense, yo. And if you don't get it, it's because that's you. You don't get it. I don't know what else, if that's not the definition, the definitive, if that isn't the poster child of gaslighting, I don't know what is. If that is not the definitive poster child definition of gaslighting, I don't know what the fuck is, folks. And it's interesting to me, it's curious that he's stepping back. Is it a hiatus? Is it going to come back? Because the pandemic's not over, right? And we've already been told by the powers that be that we better be ready for a second wave. Anyways, let's leave it at that, folks, because we need to watch this space, as they say nowadays on the news shows. We need to keep an eye on what's going on. One of the first memes I made this year is about being mindful. We have to observe the politics, not get caught up in judging it and arguing about it and apologizing for it, explaining it or rationalizing it. That's what they want. That's the treadmill. That's the little fucking hamster ball they want to put you in. So you just run around in a hamster ball and can't do dick because you're stuck, apologizing and or arguing over things with your fellow Americans. If there's anything clear to me about what is an important aspect of the nefarious evil agenda by whoever the fuck the overlords really are, it's that they would rather have you fighting over the dumbest things, which are imaginary, right? Politics, made up. Imaginary. All ideological constructs do not exist in nature. They've got us arguing about fantasy and willing to betray each other, to insult each other, to even get physical violent with each other, to kill each other. Speaking of, one of the weirdest one of the more depressing things I saw on the news in the last 48 hours, which got, I think, somewhat severely underreported, is that there has been an uptick in violence. Surprise, surprise. There's been an uptick in gun violence. Surprise, surprise. There's been an uptick in domestic terrorism threat making. Surprise, surprise. Oh, and wait for it. There's been a massive explosion in gun sales. Now, this may feel like a shoe we've been waiting to drop forever. This may feel like I'm pulling something out of left field to you. But if you go back, you'll note that both on my social media for decades and on my podcast for as long as it's been around, I've been bringing out and trying to bring people's attention to this curious pattern. No matter what you think about guns, gun rights, gun safety, gun violence, one thing that clear-sighted, free-thinking, rational individuals should be able to observe, measure, verify for themselves, and come to a pretty consensus conclusion about is this. If you look at it, if you really look at it, the gun industry is profiteering on us. And through their various channels, such as the NRA, etc., they pump out fear-mongering content to always keep us radically afraid of each other. As fellow Americans, as countrymen and countrywomen, as citizens united in this grand experiment of people living together, working together, building things together, the military-industrial complex wants you armed to the teeth and living in fear of your neighbors. So, as we sit in this stressful, anxiety-ridden, fear-mongering, riddled humanitarian effort to prevent a disease which, quite frankly, I can tell that the average Joe Schmo is like, I don't even know if this is real or not. You know? A lot of people doubt this shit is real because they haven't gotten it, they haven't found anyone in their circles to have gotten it, and they haven't lost anyone to it yet. That will eventually change if it's real, right? I am leaning towards, but I do not believe on blind faith, that it is indeed another real disease. Because to me, as a devotee of Mother Nature, it makes perfect sense. I don't think Mother Nature is a wrathful God the way the God of the Bible is a jealous and wrathful God. But I do believe that Mother Nature takes no shit and has an agenda of her own, bigger, larger, and to her, more important than any of our profiteering bullshit. And that if there was one kind of, ridiculed theory that I would probably say I have to agree with and maybe even subscribe to, is that it's not impossible, folks. It is not impossible that this disease, and quite frankly, every other disease, like cancer, etc., that digs at us and chews us up and butchers us and kills us and hunts us down, is Mother Nature's way of not being mean and spiteful and wrathful, but trying to protect herself and her other children from us, the radically toxic, rebellious, disrespectful, sociopathic, suicidal, butchering child of hers that is drinking her blood and eating her bones for profit. Is that crazy of me to say out loud? I don't know. But if you agree, then help me get that message out there, because if there ever was a time when we could really rally around sane, rational, scientific, and spiritual thinking that is cohesive and makes sense, it is now. The moment to realize that spiritual thinking and scientific thinking do not oppose each other, but rather can complement and work together really well, is now. The moment to realize that we, ourselves, our bodies themselves, do all the healing, and that no matter how helpful it can be, doctors only, in the best of times and in the most, what's the word? When they're the least corrupt and the least negligent and the least incompetent, they simply help position our body with the best context and the best nutrition and the best tools and the best setting for the body to do the work that it knows how to do on its own, and that we actually aren't really clear on. We don't really understand how it does, what it does, right? Like, do you know how your teeth grew out of your skull? I mean, I can understand it in the ways in which the biological, academic tradition teaches it, I guess. But I also couldn't tell you why it is that way and how my body does it without my mind having anything to do with worrying about it. I digress. What's the point? I'm running on. It's 44 minutes and it's about to be 44 seconds at the tone. We are here. And we are in the middle of this now. We are here and now, right? And as I've said before, and I'll say again, and I will bore people to tears saying this. We can either keep fighting and arguing and accusing each other and accusing the politicians, and ultimately, because of all of that arguing and fighting, neglecting our spiritual calling, failing to heal each other and ourselves and the species, and preventing ourselves from fixing the problems we've created. Or we can get busy with the healing. I'm going to leave it there, folks. As always, a deep and serious thank you for tuning in. I hope you've appreciated what I've shared and what I got to say, and I hope you tune in for more. And also, sort of like a teaser preview announcement, I am now finally organized in position to sort of do a couple of different things that have been dragging ass forever. And I'm going to hopefully, in the next couple of days, crank out some new content for you to enjoy. So stay tuned for that. And I mean content different than this podcast. So stay tuned for that. I'll be explaining more in greater detail soon. And oh wow, my outro music already played out. So I'm gonna go ahead and play the GMT outro for you too, just to not end it awkwardly. Until next time, friends, be good humans. Realize that this could very well be even more serious than whatever fear-mongering they are successfully or unsuccessfully plying us with. Because if this is a real disease, actually, I can't not stop myself here. Assuming this is a real emergent disease caused by a new pathogen, right? Like it's a different pathogen, and that we don't really understand its rate of mutation, and we don't really understand how it's interacting with our bodies, right? Like, it's just the flu, it's just the flu. It's obviously not just the flu because it causes seizures and strokes, apparently causes liver damage, and is interacting with other diseases in really weird ways. In other words, we're being ignorant monkeys, right? And we're not letting the politicians and the political-minded bases are helping to obstruct the advance of science. I'm sure there's probably corruption going on in the science too, right? Could do a whole episode about testing. In fact, we will come back a little bit later for the episode where I rant about testing. You see where I'm going though, folks, right? All right. Peace out. And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.